Thank you guys very much for having me. My name's Monica Parker. I'm founder of a company called Hatch. And Hatch is a human analytics and change consultancy, and we specialize in the future of work. The term Hatch is actually an acronym. It stands for Human Analytics Think Connect Hatch, but it also comes from this quote, which for all of the hatchlings that we deliver the work, this is sort of our mantra. And it says, you cannot go on indefinitely being an ordinary, decent egg. We must be hatched or go bad. And I think this is a real clarion call for change in the way that things are changing in the world today. So I came at my job by a bit of a dog-legged process, we'll say. So I studied design in undergrad in America. I went on to get my graduate degree in organizational behavior up in Queens, in Belfast. And in between, I was a homicide investigator for the Department of Justice. And I worked with men and women on Florida's death row trying to exonerate them. I was a defense investigator. And what I learned during that time was a few things. One, space matters. The space that we occupy has an impact on our mental health, on our behavior. The communities that we surround ourselves with have an impact. And really, I started to learn that there is this intense intersection between the things that we surround ourselves and our eventual behavior. And so that is what drove me to become something of a behavior nerd. I'm quite a behavior nerd, and we tend to hire, true to that form, lots of other behavior nerds. So I feel like it's important because we're talking about the people piece to remember the other elements. When we talk about work or workplace or working at Hatch, we really talk about the three spheres of work. And so we tend to think of work as the place we go, right, if we're not flexible working. And I'll tell you, you and I were having a mind meld because I'll talk about that in a minute. The physical workplace. You've got the technological workplace. Everybody, regardless of whether they want to be or not today, is a technology company. We can't exist without it. But then, of course, it's the people, and that's why we're all here, right? The people element, if it were that bubble, it would be 3 times as big if it were up to me. But the challenge is we have to keep remembering that they are, in fact, human. They are not widgets. They are not numbers. They are not KPIs. We are hiring humans. And that's what drives work and working. So I want to talk about what I see as 3 disruptors that are really driving the changes in work and the future of work. Now, the term disruptor is far overused. I will accept that. But it was actually coined by a guy named Clayton Christensen in 1997, so more than 20 years ago. And what he said, the definition of a disruptor was the thing that changes everything that went before. So basically, it undoes all previous assumptions. And I think when we start looking at recruiting and hiring, there's no question that these 3 elements are fundamentally changing the future and actually have changed now. So the first is automation. I frequently get asked in my work, are robots going to take my job? Yes, they probably will, but you won't believe me. That's okay. So this is a piece of work done by Pew in America. They ask people, are robots going to take your job? 2/3 of Americans expect that, yes, they will, but it won't take my job, right? Because it's not going to affect us. And that's a typical bias that we say, oh, well, no, it doesn't really affect me. But the point is actually it's going to affect everybody in some way. 70% of young people in the OECD will enter the labor market today in a job lost to automation. Now, you're saying, okay, well, maybe those are lower rung jobs, or those are jobs we've already identified we're going to lose to automation. But PwC did a study, and they found that 1/3 of even their highest level of financial jobs are going to be dramatically affected by automation. And so the reason I feel I have to put this up here is, how do we recruit for jobs that maybe we're starting a recruitment strategy that in 3 or 5 years are going to look fundamentally different? I'll tell you my opinion on how to deal with all of these disruptors in just a minute. The next is globalization. Globalization, unfortunately, has become a bit of a dirty word. There's no question that the current president in America is a backlash to globalization. Some would say that Brexit is a backlash to globalization. But I see globalization as a potentially really positive thing. I love this picture. This is the first zinnia grown in space, and this is a picture taken from the space station of this zinnia. And I think it's such a beautiful example of what globalization can do, right? It's a global team coming from all over the world to create this opportunity. And it's such a beautiful sort of image with the curve of the Earth behind it. But why I think this is very interesting is that basically the guy that grew this, the astronaut, there was no lesson on how to grow in space. And so he's going back and forth to NASA, and they're sending him different booklets on how to grow in space. And when he came back, he was like, oh, I think I might be the first astronaut gardener. And that sort of popped into my head because I was like, that's a cool job. I want to be an astronaut gardener. But this is the thing, 65% of kindergarten children will work in jobs that haven't even been invented yet. I mean, that's amazing, the pace of change. And to me, that's really exciting. But of course, as someone in recruiting, you start rocking back and forth because you're like, oh my God, how do I write all these job descriptions? Can someone give me a job description for an astronaut gardener? I mean, it is very challenging, but it's also an incredibly exciting time to be in the industry. And then the next is portfolio work. There's no question that we've got slashies, right? We've got people that are doing gig this and gig that. It seems like everybody's got some side gig. But I think it's beyond just portfolio work. It's a portfolio world. Like everything is on demand now. You can get space as a service. So the hatchlings are WeWorkers. We're in WeWork. You can get software as a service. You can get a dog as a service. You can rent someone's dog for the weekend. I mean, everything is available as a service. Well, that means that people are going to start expecting a much different sort of relationship to their employer. They may not want the traditional, well, here's your job, you work all week, we send you a paycheck. They're going to expect different types of relationships. Now, this is a statistic that absolutely blows my mind. So how long have you been with Barclays, you said? 9 years. Anybody in here been with their company for over 10 years? So we do a lot of work with insurance companies. There are people 30 years, 40 years. You get less for murder for that. This is changing. It's changing forever. A child today will have 16 jobs in 5 industries. 16 jobs in 5 industries. They're not even going into an industry anymore. They're going to be changing constantly. Now, some of those changes are going to be by choice. Some of them won't be because of the constant changing face of work, right? They'll be automated or the role will just fundamentally change. But this is something that I think is really the key that could be the future of both recruiting, hiring, education. There's an organization called the Foundation for Young Australians. I highly encourage you, write that down if you want, Foundation for Young Australians. They do incredible research looking at the youth of Australia and what their future will look like. And they do global research, and we have a partnership with them. And they've come up with this approach saying that instead of training people or educating people to be a lawyer or to be a computer scientist, we need to start looking at job clusters, at skills clusters, and basically training people to be in a particular cluster. And my belief is that this is the future of recruitment as well. That rather than having a traditional job description, we're going to hire someone based on a cluster. Why? Because you may hire someone for a job, and then in 18 months, that job has fundamentally changed. What do you do? What do you do with this person? You let them go? No, if you've hired them for a cluster, there will always be another opportunity for them. You can hold on to them. That's where recruitment and retention can start to link together. And so I think this is an opportunity to really fundamentally change how we see roles, how we see education, how we see hiring and retaining. So these are some statistics that I'm sure you've seen before. Everybody's seen the Gallup stuff, right? But the second one always sort of strikes me still, that you've got 82% of workers not engaged. Those are people who say they were sleepwalking through their day. But that second one, 18% active saboteurs to their coworkers' success. Active terrorists. I'll tell you one of the quickest ways to get a terrorist. You hire them, you give them this great story about what their job's going to be about, you give them this story about the culture, you tell them they're going to have flexible working, and then they come in and they're like, wait, this wasn't the office I was interviewed in. Where's that nice office that was down in Canary Wharf? Oh, wait, you told me I was going to be able to work flexibly, but oh, that's just for managers? The quickest way to get a terrorist in your organization is to do a bait and switch, to tell people, look at this shiny bauble of a business. And then when they get there, it's something completely different. Just be honest, and people will self-select. And if your job, if your way of working, if your culture is just that crappy, well then work on that. Don't work on selling people to try to get them in the business when they shouldn't be there. So 2 of the 3 reasons people leave their job are culture and motivation. So what is it that you're doing to align culture and motivation when you're hiring them? I'm going to guess if I ask this question, how many of you hire for a cultural fit? Yeah, come on, most of you are like, yeah, that's what we do. When I go into the businesses that we work with and we do interviews and we ask people, tell me what your culture is, how often do you think we get the same answer? Do you even really know what your culture is when you're saying we're hiring for a cultural fit? Number one, figure it out, codify it, be proud of it, announce it, scream it from the rooftops, because if you're not, then you can't hire for a cultural fit. You're hiring for what you believe or what you've been told from the recruiting team. It's got to be authentic, and you have to really own it. So what I see is this gap, this big gap between where we are in recruiting and retaining and what the future will be. And so I'm going to give you what I see as the four C's. It's easy to remember that way. Elements that people are looking for when they're coming in to your company, and then also a couple that I think is what you should be hiring for. So community, control, curiosity, and cause. So the first is community. We know community is important, but how important? There's been a lot of talk about sitting being the new smoking. I imagine you guys have heard that before, right? Well, there's actually been studies that say that loneliness is the new smoking. Loneliness has the same physiological impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. People who report they're lonely are 30% more likely to have heart disease or diabetes. And yet 1/3 of the UK, of all of the UK, lives alone right now, 1/3 of them. And by 2030, they think it'll be almost 50%. So think about this. You live alone. You get in the tube to go to work. We don't make eye contact because Brits don't make eye contact in the tube. And then we go to work and we email the person sitting next to us, right? We've all done it. We know we've all done it. The challenge is that we have to pierce that veil. We have to create a tribal sense of community because that is what keeps people. So if you have that sense, people will feel it. They'll feel that sense of community and will definitely read on Glassdoor reviews if you have that, because people will be compelled to share with you their sense of community. So this is some Hatch data that we have. 89% say relationships with their colleagues are primary contributors to their sense of engagement in the workplace. So Hatch do a survey. We've got about 40,000 respondents globally at this point. And so this matters. You don't trust Hatch? Listen to Gallup. What does Gallup say? Gallup says one of the single biggest indicators if someone will stay in a job for a year, the next year, a best work friend. So think about that also when you're recruiting and when you're losing people. If you're hemorrhaging people, those aren't just numbers you have to backfill. That's somebody's best work friend. And that means that that person is also at risk. So think about how they're going to start integrating into that community. You have to really know what that is so that when you have someone else come in, they go, yeah, I could be friends with that person too, because it matters. It matters, especially when we're as lonely as we are. We're looking for that connection at our workplace. The next is control. And this is where you and I were having the mind meld, because I'll tell you what, control, it's about giving up control. It's about autonomy. And I hate to tell you that if you are recruiting right now for a company that doesn't offer flexible working, you should start looking for another job, because it's going to be really freaking hard. It is the single biggest non-remuneration benefit in the OECD. People expect it, and they're going to start demanding it. It's just going to be baseline. So if you're not there yet, you can call Hatch and we can help you. But if you're not there yet, honestly, you need to get there, because it's really, really important for people to feel a sense of control over their day-to-day lives. And when people say, I'm so busy, I just can't manage it, our research shows that time paucity, the sense of being time poor, is actually heavily linked to autonomy. If people can just control their time, they actually start to feel like they have more of it without any workload change. It's a miracle. But if people go, well, we can't let them do that because we've got the bottom line to worry about. This is a study done by Cornell University, and what they found, they basically took two teams that were identical, and they gave one team a command and control structure. Everything was command and control, driven, mother may I, all of it. And then the other team was given complete autonomy. They could self-form, they decided what their goals were. They performed by 4 times better than the command and control team. 4 times better. Humans respond to autonomy. That's what we want. That's what drives us. So if you're not able to offer that to a candidate, you're going to be really, really challenged to recruit and retain the best. The next is cause. And I love, love, love this picture. So is anybody familiar with the art of the brick? Did anybody see it when it was here? Oh, it's so cool. So you may not know the story of the Lego brick artist. So this is an American guy. His name is Nathan Sawaya, and he was actually a lawyer. So he went about his day-to-day life lawyering, and he would go home at night and on weekends, and he would build Lego brick art. And he was just obsessed with it. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, one day he said, I can't be a lawyer anymore. I've got to be a Lego brick artist. And I would love to be a fly on the wall with that conversation with his mom. Mom, Dad, I know you put me through law school and all of that, but the bar, but I want to be a Lego brick artist. But this is the thing. If you were to put on the surface, well, Lego brick artist or lawyer, you'd say, well, a lawyer obviously has a bigger cause. That's a more cause-driven role. But not for Nathan Sawaya, and maybe not for your staff either. You know, as you're recruiting these people, try to tap into what their cause drives them. What is it? Why do they want to belong to that? I hope it's not just a paycheck, because that won't keep them around for long. What is it that cause can be? And maybe it's not actually even a cause that you can offer them in that role, but perhaps you can find what it is that lights their fire about that cause and figure out a way to link that into the work that you're doing. You know, some people, their cause is just to make the best gosh darn cup of coffee as a barista. And if that's it, great. But tap into it and don't make assumptions about what is more cause-driven than the next. So now those are the things that they're looking for from you, but this is something that I think that you should be looking for from your candidates. So this is a word that I'm guessing most of you have not seen. It's Meraki. It is a Greek word. And it doesn't really have a direct English translation, but the closest that it comes is 1 part purpose, 1 part passion with a sprinkling of grit. That's what you should be hiring for. If I could put nothing else on a hiring descriptor, that's what I want. I want 1,000 people with Meraki. What their skills are, you can train that. You can't train this. And if you can find people who have this, you better hold on to them, because that is what creates culture. That's what drives businesses. Meraki, passion, purpose, and grit. And then the last is curiosity. I'm one of these believers that every emotion can be distilled down to one of 2 things, love or fear, right? So love is all the happy stuff, and fear is all the yucky bits. And so I find that a lot of people, when they're afraid to deal with things, they stop being curious. But curious is one of the most powerful elements that we can have, and you definitely want to hire for curiosity. Now, I know a lot of people say that, right? But I want to give you the social science behind that, actually the neuroscience behind that. So curiosity does this amazing thing. When people are curious about something, it triggers the area of dopamine in our brains. So dopamine is, you know, it's like a drug. It's a happiness drug in our brains. So the dopamine is released because we're excited and we want to know, but then this is the cool bit. When we get to the answer of whatever it is we're curious about, that triggers the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is what embeds things into long-term memory. So if you've got people that you're hiring, their jobs are going to be changing constantly because we all have to be nimble, you better get people who are super curious, because that means they learn faster. They learn faster because when they're curious and they learn the answer, it sticks in their brain better. So there's a scientific reason you want to hire for curiosity, and it's going to be one of the most powerful ways that you can keep people nimble in an organization and also excited to be there. So I will finish. I love quotes because so many people say things better than myself. Do not hire a man who does your work for money, but him who does it for love. So thank you guys very much.